Are welcome. Your thoughts important. 072 567 1567 021 446 0567. And often when we talk about land reform, I don't know if you've noticed knee-jerk reactions. People are not like kind of thinking through the issues and the fractures in society as a consequence, and the responsibility of everybody. It's got to be push and pull. There's inevitably give and take. And again, I say magnanimity is so lacking in the South African story, and maybe just the solution resides somewhere in that word. So let's find the magnanimity and deal with the issues. So there's been growing call for broader players to participate in land reform, including private sector philanthropists and other non-governmental organizations, and that to support the government in driving a successful land reform process and restitution program. Peter Setou is the chief executive of the Vumelana Advisory Fund, a non-profit organization that works with land reform beneficiaries to make their land productive by facilitating partnerships between communities and investors. He joins us live via Zoom, and he'll be able to speak broadly about what is needed and share some insights based on the organization's experience working with beneficiaries of the land reform program, mainly within restitution. Welcome, Peter. It's good to have you.
Thank you, Clarence, and thanks for having me.
I'm saying there needs to be some magnanimity. There needs to be some push and pull. There inevitably will be some push and pull. There needs to be give and take. It's a vexing problem, and I see even the intellectuals are clumsy around it. Can it be simplified, this vexing issue that we have, this very serious issue confronting South Africa's future?
Well, I think what you've just raised is quite important, and in the sense that March generally is celebrated as a Human Rights Month. Now, we need to be mindful that the commemoration of this day really would sound hollow to millions of people who on a daily basis face hunger and remain landless with their property rights yet to be acknowledged. I think as a starting point, we need to acknowledge that land is a right, but also it's a constitutional imperative, and so is the right to economic participation. Now, land ownership and rights is an integral part of our system. So in the face of increasing levels of poverty, land ownership could actually offer a much needed reprieve to millions of South Africans, and prove to be a viable asset that can enhance entrepreneurship, amongst other things. And it's a way in which they could possibly be included in the mainstream economy and a source of really income and producing food for millions of poor South Africans. And it's for that reason, as an organization, we are saying we really need to do more as a country, and all role players and stakeholders need to come on board to make sure that this is a reality.
Sure. An above board kind of process has also kind of been undermined. I mean, we cannot look, for example, at the Ingonyama Trust as an ideal kind of solution or a model for solutions. We cannot look at the solutions that have been forwarded as solutions to the problem by government. We've seen literally cabinet ministers getting farms, which is not the kind of land reform that is required, or the farms or the land going to rightful beneficiaries but not being able to be worked in their interest, and it being sold off again at a pittance to the open market. So a lot of things have bedeviled the process. I hear you about the rights that come with it, but what about this process that is going to lead us to, more beneficial distribution of land ownership in this country?
Well, I think you're raising an important point. We just need to make sure that that the transfer of land goes hand in hand with post-settlement support, meaning that before land is actually transferred to its rightful owners, there needs to be plans on how these land parcels could be efficiently and effectively be utilized, and whether the beneficiaries have got the requisite capacity and the skill sets to really work the land, including ensuring that there is a funding plan for such beneficiaries. On the one hand, you are raising some of the challenges that are associated with land reform. I mean, there are a lot of studies that have been done, some of them by government itself, really aimed at identifying some of the challenges that characterizes land reform, and this include, amongst others, corruption, as you've rightly pointed out, associated with the process and implementation. For infightings amongst the communal property associations or landowning entities, insufficient support, as an example, for beneficiaries in the form of resources, skills, as well as access to market, and generally the lack of capacity within the state itself to implement its programs, including lack of coordination amongst the state players. So we need to address all of these things if we are to make land reform a reality for the majority of South Africans, And I think for me, really, partnerships, there's just growing body of evidence that partnerships are critical for sustainable land reform, because it's one thing to want to give our people land, but it's something else if you give them land without the requisite ingredients that are actually required to make sure that they can utilize this land. Yeah. It's almost like you are setting them up for failure.
Absolutely. I want to just the principle, and I want to see if we can find consensus on the principle of rightful beneficiaries. Who would you describe? Who is a rightful beneficiary?
Well, government has got 3 programs. I mean, land reform has got 3 broad programs. You've got land restitution, which is really focused on those communities who were dispossessed, who were removed from their land. Now, there's a process that government follows in terms of, investigating those claims, verifying those claims to make sure that it's lawful beneficiaries who get the land back, so that the land is restituted to the rightful beneficiaries. Now, the commission has got an elaborate process that they follow to identify who are the rightful owners. So that's land restitution. The second leg of the land reform program is land redistribution. This is a process where, for example, government would purchase farms and give it to deserving, beneficiaries or people from previously disadvantaged backgrounds. And I think this is where we've got a lot of challenges, in the sense that it's not very clear who is actually eligible to get land, and that's why some people are actually saying, if you are not closer to the powers that be, you are unlikely to get this piece of land, Sometimes you find that the people who get these land parcels are themselves actually working and staying in the urban areas and only go to these farms over the weekends, So it is crucial that we develop elaborate policies in terms of who can benefit, for example, in terms of land redistribution, to make sure that it's deserving people who are really keen to work this land, who can be supported to make sure that they can, utilize this land parcels. Yeah. The last leg being land that's really located within, or rather under the administration of the tribal authorities, land tenure, for lack of a better word. In this instance, you'll find that these are tribal authorities who've been, for example, administering these land parcels for a long time, but yet you find it that our people do not have, their rights are actually quite restricted.
Yes.
You live in these land parcels. You're not sure whether you are going to be evicted at some point or another.
And an example of that is Ingonyama Trust. Is that correct?
Absolutely. We need to make sure that we revise our policies to make sure that people who are living in rural areas, particularly under the chieftainships, or land that is administered by the kings, is actually well run.
Right.
To make sure that there are policies in place, to make sure that the rights of inhabitants are actually protected.
Yeah, you're making a very important distinction. You're saying it is not a historical claim. It is a little more than that. It is current relationship with the land, because you're living in the city and have been for the past 100 years. Doesn't mean you have a legitimate claim. Doesn't make you necessarily a rightful beneficiary. That's the one thing that you say. Then, of course, there are people that illegally own the land, given away 99-year leases during apartheid times, and 99-year leases are 10 years, sitting on that land still illegitimately. They have received the land and they've productively worked it. How do we deal with that?
Well, I think each and every case must be dealt with on its merit, and which is why, for example, we've got land restitution. I mean, to the extent that this is claimed land, then an investigation needs to be done, and if it's confirmed that Group A or Community A are actually the rightful beneficiaries, such land should be transferred to such beneficiaries. But we are raising another point where people are actually occupying land illegally. If you are occupying land illegally, I think the law should take its course. But I think at times we tend to be, barking the wrong tree. I mean, the reality is, as we speak now, in excess of 9 million hectares have already been transferred through government's land redistribution and restitution program. Whilst this can be hailed as good progress in the sense that, I mean, 9 million hectares is no child's play. However, we need to make sure that people who receive these land parcels are able to use them productively, thus addressing poverty and creating much needed jobs. So I'm actually arguing that what is the point of trying to get more and more land when we are sitting with the bulk part of land parcels which remain underutilized?
We hear you. We hear you, and I think let's go there. Let's go there. We understand a little more about the rightful beneficiaries. We're talking about historic patterns of dispossession to benefit just a certain group under apartheid, and all of that. Now and keeping it productive is absolutely important. It can't go fallow if it is productive land, and this is what you're asking for. You're talking about a partnership-driven model to keep it productive. Please elaborate.
Well, as I've said, there's growing body of evidence that partnerships between land reform beneficiaries and the private sector is really critical for sustainable land reform. I mean, government on its own cannot implement land reform, especially in the context of so many other pressing and competing demands on the fiscus. As an example, just to mention a few: public health care, education, to mention just a few. So for us to expect that government will be able to fund all these programs, I think we are making a big mistake. Our work as an organization, as Vumelana, bears testament to the fact that these partnerships between the beneficiaries and private sector players or investors is probably the most quicker way of actually resolving the current challenges. I mean, we have, since our inception, concluded about 26 projects, which would attract R1 billion in private investment, and this would put to productive use just over 72,000 hectares of land, positively impacting on over 16,000 households. Now, for a moment, if we were to replicate this, I think we'll go a long way to address some of the current challenges where you find that land has been transferred to our people, yet it's actually not utilized. And in fact, we've had instances where land was transferred, valuable land parcels, where people were employed, etc. And when this land was actually transferred, people lost jobs as a result of that transfer, because, the land was transferred under circumstances where the intended beneficiaries were not fully supported such that they can continue to use such land.
Yeah.
So we need to, that's why for us we are saying, because government doesn't always have all the money to assist our people, we need to look at partners who have got the requisite skills, firstly, secondly, who have got access to finance, and thirdly, who have got access to markets, because that's also important. Yes. It's one thing you've got money, but you also need to have access to market. I mean, you can have produce, but if you don't have access to markets, it's just gonna sit there and rot, if you like. So it is important that we create this partnership so that there's also skills transference, so that our people over time can take over and run some of these land parcels productive.
I'm chatting to Peter Setou, Chief Executive of the Vumelana Advisory Fund. We're talking about land reform on the eve of Human Rights Day on 21st March, and we need to move fast on that particular front. It is literally a time bomb. I think we're also focusing a lot on the rural needs and implications of land reform, but there are urban needs as well. We can't talk about land reform in Cape Town without talking about District 6. I was born there. I've literally seen the tears. I was part of the anxiety as a kid of having to move out there because the government declared it a white group area, and the pain of my parents, I could feel. Let's take a listen to a voice note, if you don't mind, Peter, and maybe you can talk to it. This is from a listener.
Clarence, I take it you well. Regarding the land restitution, I understand the gentleman when it comes to certain land issues, but District 6 is my main big bucket. Why don't, if I have proof, we have proof that we live there. I beg your pardon, not me, my parents. The people are 76, 78, they are not well any longer, and they're not that healthy, and they're passing over. But yet the delay system is so, they're delaying the system so much and frustrating everyone. And why can't we just say, listen here, oh, you live there, can you prove it? Die Mankasaki langs jou gewoon, en na de Mohammed en dan Maria daar gewoon. Okay, yes, you have absolute proof. Here's your house, here's your a piece of land, and you had better work it within the next, not work it, but build on it in the next year or two. But it goes on and on and on and on. It's really, really sad.
And I think we got your point there.
What are the intent?
We got your point. District 6, also one of those emotional kind of stories, unfortunate stories that played out in the past. Any comments on that one, Peter?
I think this is really a sore point, considering the fact that this month is Human Rights Month. I mean, the fact that we've had so many years of democracy and we're still sitting with this kind of challenges, I mean, it talks to the point that you are raising, that if we do not address some of these issues as soon as it's reasonably possible, we are doing that at our own peril, because this is a bomb waiting to explode. Yes. You know. But I do think as civil society, as the general populace, we really need to start engaging with government and putting more pressure where the delays on the part of government, to make sure that some of these, claims are actually resolved expeditiously. And you are raising another important point to say, frequently when we're talking about land reform, people always think about the rural areas. People always think about agriculture as an example. There are different land parcels which are not suitable for agriculture. We have since been transferred to our people, for example, which are suitable for tourism, you know. And we know that in tourism we can really create real jobs, you know, where people can earn decent salaries. We need to make sure that we fast track some of these land claims and ensure that people who get this kind, whose land gets restituted, are actually supported to make sure that they can utilize their land. I mean, the case in point from the caller, I think it needs to be, you know, urgently addressed, so that our people have waited for much, much longer. We need to put pressure on government to make sure that these issues are addressed as soon as possible. The other issue that's somewhat an integral part of this is a funding issue, because as far as I'm concerned, sometimes, I mean, government can only settle so many claims in a specific year based on the budget that they've got. You know, if we are to rely on purely just on budgetary constraints that government has got, I think this problem is going to be with us for a much, much longer period. We need, as a country, both civil society, business, and generally ordinary South Africans, we need to identify innovative ways of actually funding land reform, given that there'll always be government cuts on resourcing, etc. So we need to find creative ways of actually funding land reform, because some of those delays, as you are describing in Cape Town, some of them are actually related to the issue of funding. So we need to address funding, as it were.
And is it really just about title deed, about a title deed accruing to a rightful beneficiary? But it is, preserving that kind of value that comes with the title deed for a future generation, because the compelling urge is going to be to sell it. Those are the other things that I think needs to be considered. These are just enough. That title deed, these are just the dignity then, and then let the market determine what you do with it. You do with it what you want to do with it. If you want to sell it back to the previous owner, for example, go ahead with. What are the dignity that comes with it? Is that enough?
Well, I think it should go beyond just dignity, because unfortunately the beneficiaries of land reform as new entrants to the market cannot raise working capital from financial institutions, as there are tenure restrictions imposed on land reform.
But they have a fixed...
Beneficiaries are not permitted
they have security
to borrow
now.
money, for example, against their land, or they use their land for security. I think government needs to review this, because otherwise you have a situation where people have got these assets and yet they can't use these assets. I mean, me and you, if we've got houses and we need to go and borrow money, we go to a bank and say, dear bank, I've got this house and I've got, it's worth so much, etc., etc. I need rent X. Can you borrow me money? And the bank would say, okay, you've got this asset, you own this asset, it's worth so much. I'm willing to give you a loan against your this specific asset as it is.
And you can add value to that asset.
In addition to this, one is to acknowledge the fact that lending institutions operate under stringent regulations which compel prospective clients, for example, to demonstrate affordability, etc., that they have got a track record. Now, we know that majority of our people cannot meet some of these requirements. So this is really a broader issue for me. It needs to be addressed if we are to begin to improve broader access to finance for these new entrants. And
we're gonna need to wrap it there, unfortunately. Yes, indeed, it is a vexing problem. Maybe not intractable. You are suggesting that we can manage it, and we need to talk some hope into this matter, because it is a timetable. Just difficult to find that hope from time to time. The land issue, a very difficult issue for South Africa, but one that we've got to deal with. It is time for Eyewitness News headlines. Graham Robenheimer at 11:30.
And you'll often find, Clarence, in Johannesburg in particular,